Ready. All right. Good morning. Once again, I'm Kitty Rubenstein with Jefferson County Master Gardeners, welcoming you to day one of our Home and Garden Show. We will be here tomorrow from 9 to 3. And I do want to tell you what a joy it is to introduce this morning's speaker, Janet Carson. She is one of our own homegrown treasures. Janet graduated from the University of Arkansas with a bachelor's degree in urban horticulture and landscape design and earned a master's degree in general agriculture with a minor in horticulture. She's been an extension specialist in horticulture for the U of A since 1992. She's also state coordinator for the Arkansas Master Gardeners, a program she started in 1988. Janet writes the In the Garden column for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, which appears on Saturday. She is married to Clay Carson. She has 2 grown children, and I think as of this morning, 5 dogs?
3 are mine.
Well, okay. I always have to ask how many. And she collects art glass. Master gardeners have always found Janet to be very knowledgeable, and yet she is patient and kind. In other words, she's not upset with us if we don't know the Latin names of our plants. And once again, it is a pleasure to have her with us.
Thank you, Kitty.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And we are trying something a little new today. I am broadcasting live to you all right here, but we also have people that are able to watch this broadcast on their computers at home. So welcome to you all too. It sure does feel like spring already, does it not? And it has felt like that since December this year. So it's been a very confusing year, and we hope that the rest of this winter is kind to us and we don't have as much damage as we did last year. But which one of these is right? You know, the groundhog supposedly this week said that we're going to have an early spring. Well, we've had an early spring since December. We have not had a winter to speak of. Now, we did have over 5 inches of snow in Little Rock a couple of weeks ago, but the snow was a good insulator. I did not see much damage. But if you were cutting your persimmon seeds open this year, you know that we had a lot of spoons in them. We had a couple of knives. Knives means a cold, biting winter. Spoons mean a lot of snow for shoveling, and we have not seen either of those. So we hope that the rest of the winter is the same way, because plants outside think it is spring. You know, we did have over 5 inches of snow in Little Rock. North Little Rock actually had 7 inches of snow. It didn't stay very long on the streets, but it did stay in our yards for about, I'd say, 4 or 5 days. But that's come and gone. Then we had over 70 degrees. And, you know, it was 72, I think, the other day. We've had the air conditioner on. So we've gone from feast to famine this year, and our plants are quite confused. We have had flowering quince in bloom now in many of our gardens since the end of December, 1st of January. And so plants don't know what to expect. Things think it is spring, these extended warm periods, even though we're having some cool mornings, it is still warming up pretty well in the afternoon. All of these pictures I took the end of December. We had daffodils already in bloom. And I've had a lot of folks telling me that in their gardens, their daffodils are blooming. I've heard of hyacinths already blooming, although my crocus are not. But azaleas, if you looked at your garden in January, early January, you still had encore azaleas in bloom. But it wasn't just encores that were blooming. Many of our spring blooming azaleas were also blooming this year, quite late or quite early in the spring. We had our first killing frost in Little Rock January the 9th. That is late. We had some freezes prior to that, but killing frost was that late. So a lot of our plants just barely have gone dormant, and now they're already coming out. Bearded iris blooming downtown Little Rock. That's just pretty hard to imagine. So now we're seeing the hydrangeas. Now, how many of you down here have had good blooms on your big leaf hydrangeas the past 2 years? Very few hands are up in the audience. I had one bloom the spring before last, and I had two last year. And I told my big leaf hydrangeas they were out of the yard. I was tired of messing with them not blooming. But I never got around to it, so they've had a reprieve. But if they don't have blooms this year, it's done. Because here's the problem with the big leaf hydrangeas. Unless you're growing the repeat bloomers, when they go dormant in the fall, their flower buds are set. And when they have even 3 or 4 days of warm conditions, those top buds start to break dormancy. The buds on my hydrangeas have been green now since the end of November. And so they've made it through. They even made it through that snowstorm. I went out and looked, and they are still green. They still do not have damage. But if they get frozen back, all of their growth comes from the very bottom of the plant, and they won't bloom this year. Unless you're growing the repeat bloomers like the Endless Summer, Blushing Bride, or Lady in Red. So here's our buds, and that's what happened. They look like dead sticks in the winter, don't they? Those dead sticks contain the flowers. So if you have damage on your big leaf hydrangeas, again, if you live in northwest Arkansas, you haven't seen great blooms on big leaf hydrangeas except for maybe once out of 10 years. We don't even recommend they put them in up there anymore unless they plant the repeat bloomers because of this problem with winter damage. In Arkansas, it's not how cold it gets in the winter. It's the fluctuating temperatures that causes damage. And boy, have we seen that this year. So it's those plants that are getting lots of sun, they start breaking dormancy, and then we get a cold snap, and it goes back and forth. We also had a lot of damage last year on figs. If you had fig trees, many people that's a large fig tree there that's down in Stamps, Arkansas. And down in South Arkansas, they have had trees for a long time. But when I started work for Extension, we called them fig bushes because they got frozen to the ground almost every year. Now, the nice thing with figs is that even if they do get damaged and frozen back, they still bear fruit on that current season growth. But we have a lot less figs when they get frozen back. So you notice that last year, most of the growth was coming from the soil line, and that's from about central Arkansas, I would say from Pine Bluff really, till about Clarksville. Past that, they are not considered as winter hardy, although they are doing some trials of them in Fort Smith. But we have to wait and see. So far, those buds don't look damaged yet either. If you've looked at your perennials, in fact, I encourage you to walk your garden at least once a week, if not every day, because your garden changes every day. New things are growing. You may see a new problem or see a new bloom. But if you've taken a look at your perennials, my daylilies are even bigger than that now. They are up a good 6 to 8 inches. A lot of our perennial plants have broken dormancy and are growing. And it's during this transition period that they can be a little bit more sensitive to cold. So with low-growing plants like the Lychnis here or the Rose Campion and the daylilies, you could easily cover that with some extra mulch. Have some leaves that you just pile up over them. You could do something to help protect them, but they're easy. Now, if you have fruit trees, I've seen cherry trees already in bloom. If you've got fruit trees blooming, or I saw yesterday some tulip magnolias blooming, you can't get out and cover a large tree. You just have to hope it's a nice windy night when it's going to get cold. Because when do we have the most cold damage? It's on a still, clear night. In fact, we had a lower temperature on January the 8th than we did on January the 9th, but it was a cloudy, overcast night. There was wind, so we didn't get a heavy frost. We had a little rain that day. So the next day we had a lot of humidity, so there was a lot of moisture in the air. We had a beautiful, clear, still night. You could see all the stars, and that frost accumulated and settled, and that made it the killing frost. So you need to pay attention to what the weatherman is saying, but also know about your yard. I tend to live on a slope, so I get good air movement. I don't have as much damage in my yard as people in the bottom of the hill do because frost does settle in those lower areas. Now, if you decide you're going to cover, make sure it makes sense. Don't go out there and waste your time with a Walmart bag. That is not going to give you any protection whatsoever. It may make you feel good that you're doing something to help those plants, but you're really not. That white fabric you see there is called frost blankets or rime. There's lots of different names for it. If you're a seamstress, you know what interfacing is. That fabric is very similar. But it's a cloth. Now, if you can put it where it actually is elevated over those plants, not just laying on top of it, that's going to give you a little bit of an air pocket as well and trap some residual heat underneath there. Yesterday I was down in Warren, and they actually had covered some raised beds down there because of some of the lettuce and things that were coming up. And what they did is they used that fabric and they actually put on top of it some chicken wire to keep that fabric in place and keep it from blowing away. So there are lots of options. You can buy these little special gadgets. In fact, that plastic one you see there goes over a garden kit that we gave every county extension office in the state a couple of years ago. It's a raised bed kit that's made in Greenland, Arkansas, and it works really well. It's like a little greenhouse that fits over it. The problem is, I tried that in my yard one year. You have to be home to unzip it. And I'm on the road so much. I mean, it is plastic. So it's going to generate a lot of heat during the day. And even if it's cold out, when it's this sunny like it is today, it's hot underneath that plastic. So you really need to unzip it during the day and then zip it back up at night. And when you're not home for 2 or 3 days, it just either has to be zipped or unzipped, and you're going to be in trouble. So I actually covered some things with just a cardboard box. Invert that over the top. That works very well. You can also see that vegetable gardening is cool again. Everybody wants a vegetable garden. You know, they have seen the trend is that edibles are going up every year at nurseries and garden centers. All of the big name companies that are always pushing out new annuals and perennials and shrubs, now you're seeing new blueberry varieties, new raspberry varieties, all kinds of tomatoes, dish gardens that are vegetables. So it's gotten cool. You know, I said this even last year. This is our 4th or 5th year where this trend has continued to grow. It used to be that if you had a vegetable garden, if you canned, if you sowed, and if you cooked at home, you were pretty country and old school. Now all of those things are popular again. Everybody's wanting to preserve food. Canning is back in business, making pickles. There's all kinds of that. So whether you have a traditional garden or whether you have raised beds, everyone can have success. And I think that's one of the goals for us in Extension, and also as we train our Master Gardener volunteers, is we want to give you success. You know, I teach all over the state, and I do a lot of just consumer programs. And I hear from a lot of people who are not really big gardeners that they kill whatever they touch. In fact, I've had people say, well, I don't have a green thumb. If I touch it, it dies. Well, part of that is they're planting the wrong plant in the wrong location or at the wrong time. You know, think about last year. If you went to a garden center last year in February, they were selling tomato plants. Now, if you were a young gardener and you didn't know any better and you walked into a store and saw a tomato plant for sale, what's the message? It's time to plant tomatoes. So you take it home in February and you plant it in the ground, and in a week it's dead. So do you blame the store for selling you a tomato plant in February? No, you say, I don't have a green thumb. I can't grow tomatoes. And you quit trying. So we've got to give people the right information so that they too can have success and grow tomatoes. It is time to start planting, but not tomatoes. In fact, last year we had one of the coolest and wettest springs on record. And so we weren't planting tomatoes really well until May. But it is time to start planting the cool season vegetables. And with those season extenders that I showed you just a minute ago, we are able to garden now year-round in Arkansas. In my yard in Little Rock, I have pitiful soil. I have basically no soil. I have rocks. So everything I do is raised beds. And I have 5 raised beds that are vegetables, that are dedicated to production agriculture. I have a lot of flowers and shrubs too, but right now I have 5 kinds of kale. I have bok choy, which has already bolted and is starting to bloom because it's been so warm. I have lettuce. I have cabbage. I actually thought they were broccoli. When they were in those little transplants, they were labeled broccoli. I now have 8 heads of cabbage. I'm not quite sure I'm going to do with that, but so you can plant from transplants now, but this is the time to plant the cool season vegetables. English peas, sugar snap peas, spinach, all of those can go in the garden now. So it is planting time. This is cool season. As we get into April and then May, that's when we start the warm season things. So don't push it, but always have something growing in your garden. That's my bok choy, and I took that actually last week, but you can see that's that flower bud now. It's pure yellow right now. It's my blooming bok choy at home. The kale, I think, is absolutely gorgeous. You know, we've got some purple kale. Instead of planting ornamental kale and cabbage, plant edible kale and cabbage. Have your garden and eat it too. And then last year, for the first time, I planted Brussels sprouts. You know, you couldn't have got me to eat a Brussels sprout at all when I was a kid. Now I love them. In fact, I was talking to the grocery man at my produce, or at the grocery store, and he said, you know, we used to throw kale away. We couldn't give it away. People were not eating kale. And he said now it's one of the superfoods. We can't keep it on the shelf. But it's very, very easy to grow at home. But try something new every year. You know, I say this to gardeners every time I speak. You are not a true gardener if you've never lost a plant. But if you're planting the same thing year after year after year, it gets boring. So branch out. That's an artichoke there on the left. So last year I saw those in one of our master gardener gardens. I thought, I'm going to grow artichokes. So I bought 2 artichoke plants. I planted them and they proceeded to die. Now I always say you're not a true gardener if you've never lost a plant. So I'm a true gardener. I thought 2 artichokes. But I planted around those areas and I was growing everything. This fall my artichoke plants came back. And they're now about 8 inches tall. So I'm hoping I'll have artichokes this year. Who knows? My red okra, love the red okra. It's pretty. It's ornamental. It's got beautiful yellow flowers. It's in the hibiscus family. The stems are dark red, and that pod is gorgeous. And this plant just keeps growing up. Now, my vegetable gardens are in my front yard, right on the street, which my son says is very tacky, but he's changed his tune now because he likes to eat out of them. But my neighbors stop and ask questions all the time. Well, one day my neighbor next door was driving by and he saw my red okra and he stopped and he goes, Janet, what variety of beets are you growing? So we've got to educate people a little bit better about how things grow. This was what happened when we had that hard killing frost. There's my broccoli turned cabbage. They did fine. Those were not covered. So you have to know how cold hardy things are. Lettuce is not going to take that hard freeze. So those were things that I did cover. The artichokes, I wasn't sure because I've never grown artichokes. So I covered those. But you can see those are some of my gardens, and that was taken just a week ago. So I've got a lot of production that's still going on, and as I harvest one thing, I start planting something back in that area. These are some of those other season extenders, and you can cover them, whether it's flowers that you're covering, everything that's low to the ground. This is easy to do, but having that little hoop there is enough elevation that you're getting that airflow in there as well. So even if you did decide to cover with plastic and you could open and close that plastic every day, plastic is doable. But if that plastic comes in contact with the plants and it's not open and closed, you can actually do more damage with plastic. These were some other things that you can use. That's a community garden up there at the top that is in Little Rock in the Heights. They're growing great things and they cover on cold days. I took that picture a few weeks ago. I just invert some black plastic pots. That was where my lettuce was, and it came through just fine. Herbs are another easy way. If you're getting into the edibles and you want to just try, herbs are easy to grow. Mix in with your flowers and your vegetables or your shrubs. The one thing is if you're doing that edible landscaping where you're mixing plants together, make sure you're careful about what kind of pesticides you're using, because a lot of the insecticides and fungicides that are labeled for ornamentals may not be labeled for edibles, so you do need to watch out for that. But that was my summer garden there at the top. I have lots of basil in the summer. It's a summer annual. When a freeze comes, it's gone. You can grow some of it indoors if you want to. My parsley and cilantro are doing fine right now in the winter garden. Now, I will say I have to take back on the cilantro. It's already bolting and going to coriander because it got so warm, but the parsley still looks great. We're also, everybody loves tomatoes. This is a new trend, grafted tomatoes. And we've got some demonstrations with agents teaching people how to do it themselves. I've had some master gardeners that tried about 60 and got 2 that survived. But if you buy one, they're like $20 to buy a grafted plant. And what they're doing is they take a very tough new variety that has a lot of disease resistance, and they're grafting an heirloom variety on top of it. And that allows you to have the disease resistance of the new ones, but the flavor and quality of the old varieties that you want. So that is something that's also continuing to grow. Lots of new fruits out there. They're doing a lot of things now for small scale gardens where you can grow like raspberry shortcake or these blueberry plants in a pot. And they come back every year. Now, you're not going to be making gallons of jams and jellies with these. You're talking about just enough to say, I grew some raspberries. But they're a way to incorporate those even as shrubs in your landscape. But if you think about it, blueberries are related to azaleas. They have beautiful white flowers in the spring, gorgeous edible fruit in the summer, and outstanding red fall foliage before they drop. So this could be a shrub in your landscape. Some varieties are what we call self-fruitful, which means you can have one bush and still eat the fruit. But you can also get some varieties that need a cross-pollinator. So you would need 2 varieties that are blooming and sharing that pollen. But that's an easy plant to put in the garden as long as you have sun. When we talk about home gardeners wanting fruit, what's the first thing they want? A peach tree. You see these young gardeners going out, loading up their cart with peach trees. You know they're going to dig a really nice hole. They're going to fertilize it well. They're going to water it. And then they're going to sit back and wait to harvest gallons and gallons of peaches. Not going to happen. Peaches are the hardest thing for a home gardener to grow in Arkansas. We have a lot of diseases, a lot of insects. I don't recommend home gardeners grow peaches. But if you want to grow your own fruit, try something bulletproof, like these Oriental persimmons. Now, that top one is our native persimmon. And if you've ever eaten one before a frost, you know the meaning of pucker power. They're very, very astringent. But these Oriental persimmons have very showy fruits. And when we have a freeze and the leaves drop off, the fruits persist on the plants, and it looks like you have little ornaments out there. But there's some that are the size of a grapefruit, and there are some that are the size of a tennis ball. So try some of these. Some, again, are self-fruitful, and some do need a cross-pollinator. Who's heard of this fruit? The goji berry or life berry. There's another word I just heard somebody ask the other day, and I'd never heard it called that. But this plant is lycium. It's actually related to tomatoes. But this is one of those new superfruits. And they say that if you eat these, that you're going to just live forever. I said my chipmunks are going to be going strong because they've eaten most of the fruit. That's the little flowers that you see there on the left, and that they will set fruit all season long. But these can form a tree that gets up to be about 10 to 12 feet tall. And they're covered in those little red fruits. Well, they sent me one to trial a few years ago. I had never heard of it. So I'm at my local Kroger's checking out, and next to the counter, you know how they always have those things for impulse buys? Right next to is chocolate-covered goji berries. So they've been around for a while. I just didn't know about it. So if you want to try something new, I don't think there's a whole lot of flavor to them. But they make you live forever, so go plant some and eat them. When you're choosing plants for your garden, whether it's annuals, perennials, trees, or shrubs, know something about what you're planting. Again, it comes down to right plant for the right location, and that gives you success. Know the maximum size. They all look cute in that 1-gallon pot, and then they grow up and cover up the house and we can't see out the windows. So do they need sun or shade? And then sometimes we have a shade garden and we lose our trees, and all of a sudden we're thrown into a sun garden. And put things together that need the same conditions. You know, one year I planted basil and thyme in the same pot. That was a disaster. Basil likes lots of water, thyme doesn't want any. So one of them had to go. So if you'll group things together, it'll make your job a whole lot easier. And then don't plant things too close to the house or too close to each other, because you're not allowing them to grow. I've been to some yards where they've taken these, gallon or 3-gallon pots, and they're right next to the foundation. you're not allowing the canopy or the spread to grow this way. You've got to allow room, both the front and the back, and make sure that there's plenty of room for all to grow. Don't have what I call a one-season wonder, and that's where everything is in bloom at one time. And we have a lot of those gardens in Arkansas that are daffodils, dogwoods, and azaleas. That's all that's in the yard. Now, for 3 weeks in the spring, they are beautiful. But what do they look like the other 11 months of the year? We have enough plants now to choose from that grow well in our state that we should have something blooming in every season. And you don't have to get color just with flowers. You can also get it with fruit. You've got the beautyberry there with those gorgeous purple berries. Then the foliage turns yellow, and so they're even more attractive. The one up there, we've got the anise, the star anise that you're used to with cooking. Well, this is the Florida anise or Florida anise that grows outside in the shade, and it blooms in late winter, early spring. And then the flowering quince, which normally last year wasn't blooming until March. This year it was blooming in December. We can also find that plants come in a variety of ways. Container-grown plants or things in pots can be planted 12 months out of the year. Even in July, if you want to be out there watering and planting, go for it. But we also now are seeing even trees that are coming in containers. Plants that are like this one down in the bottom corner, that's called bare root. And that's what we're seeing shipped in now. If you mail order plants, that's how they often come, because you don't have the added weight of the soil and the containers. And plants that are balled in burlap typically are our larger trees and shrubs. Those need to be planted, I would say, in a burlapped container from October through April. I don't like to do it when it's too hot outside, because that burlap can dry out and dry out the roots. Your bare root plants need to be shipped and bought while they're dormant and planted while they're dormant. Make sure that you know what's in your soil. The soil is the foundation to your garden. So if it's great soil, it's enriched with compost, it's got the needed ingredients for the plants to grow, you're going to have much happier and healthier plants. If you find out the pH is too acidic and you need to lime, knowing that before you plant is a whole lot easier to alter that than waiting until after you plant. Know how much water your yard needs. It's all going to vary. People ask me all the time, how much should I water and how often? Well, what are you growing? What kind of soil do you have? Is it sun or shade? There's a lot of variables. But everybody should have a rain gauge in their yard. I'm kind of obsessed with the weather. I have a weather station, and it's actually online. So if you go to Weather Underground, you can type in and see Janet Carson's yard, and it tells you how much rain I have, what the temperature is, what the wind speed is. If I'm on the road, which I am a lot, I can say what's happening at my yard at home. So I like to know what's going on with the weather, but you should know what's happening in your yard too. Because the weatherman can say, we got 4 inches of rain and I got 0 at my house, because it's spotty, especially in the summertime. So knowing how often your plants need water will help. Water is the most important factor for plant success. Too much or too little are both bad. So if you have an automatic system, don't just turn it on and ignore it. Test it periodically. I have an automatic system, but I'm the timer. I decide when I turn it on and when I'm going to turn it off, unless I'm on the road, and then I leave it on so that I make sure that somebody's watering. I did say know the ultimate height. Well, that's my front yard. And when I bought that loropetalum, it said it was only going to get 4 to 5 feet tall. It's 19 feet tall today. It did not read its tag. And so I kept pruning and it kept growing, and it's in pitiful soil. I did not amend that soil. Can you imagine what would have happened if I had? So I tree formed it. I limbed it up, and now it's a small tree in front of my house. So sometimes life gives you lemons and you make lemonade. That's my backyard. No, just kidding. Be able to maintain what it is you plant. You know, it's just like with a vegetable garden. When it's cool out, right now we're getting all those seed catalogs in. We think an acre vegetable garden sounds great. And then July hits and we go, woo, what was I thinking? So whatever you put in, be able to maintain. And that's with watering, pruning, whatever. I took that picture several years ago when we were in New Zealand. How many people do you think, that is one section of 4. How many people do you think maintain that yard? 3. A mom and dad in their 70s and their 34 or 5-year-old son. I was stunned, but they chose plants that took care of themselves. You know, one thing that we're often asked is what can we plant that will bloom for 12 months out of the year that we don't have to water, prune, or fertilize? We do not allow silk plants in the landscape. But there are plants that are low maintenance. And if you will choose those plants wisely, you're not going to be married to that yard with spray schedules and pruning schedules and all of that. Go to your nurseries often. You know, I was speaking in Warren yesterday, and one of the people asked me, well, you know, we don't find those plants in our nurseries. Where can we go to get those plants? Here's the thing. Develop a relationship with your local nurseryman. They carry what they can sell. And if they know that they have a customer who wants to get a special plant in, they'll try to find it for you. Now, they may not have it the day you walk in the door, but if you'll plan ahead and develop that relationship, you can get many of these plants. So, and you know, my car is sort of on autopilot. I pass a nursery, ooh, we got to turn in. You know, I've always got something that we're trying and seeing what's new. Think about the seasons again. If you don't have camellias in your yard, you're missing the boat. I think they're 10 times better than azaleas, and yet every yard has an azalea. Camellias now can grow statewide. Now, they don't have as many options in the northern tier as we do central and south, but there are sasanqua varieties that do very well up there. I actually have had a sasanqua in bloom in my yard now since the middle of November, and I still have blooms on it. How long is an azalea normally in bloom? You know, 3 weeks. If you've not tried coralopsis or winter sweet, that's not going to bloom forever, but it does have nice blooms and fragrance in the winter. My loropetalum, that's it at the top right, that's that one that got 19 feet tall. It's been blooming off and on since December. Even after the snow fell off, I had pink blooms on it. There are also white varieties, this emerald snow down here at the bottom if you don't like the pink, and a new one that has red blooms with dark purple foliage. Now, I will tell you that the original loropetalums that hit the market all went bonkers and got too tall. I'm going to grab my water, excuse me. And so now they've actually got a lot of new varieties that are doing very well and stay more compact. So if you want something that stays no taller than 2 feet, they've got them. They've got some that are 3 feet, 4 feet, and then 19 feet. But there's lots of options, and they'll grow in sun or shade. Okay, butterfly bush. This is another great plant. We've got some standard butterfly bushes. This is a dwarf butterfly bush. This is one, if you've got buddleia or butterfly bush in your garden, you need to be pruning at the end of this month. Wait until the end of February. Even though it's starting to grow, even if you see some flower buds, wait until the end of February and prune it hard, because this plant blooms on the new growth. If you don't prune it, you're not going to see as many blooms. But this thing last year was blooming for us from May up until December. We even had a few errant blooms later. And this is the dwarf one. We've got, lo and behold, blue chip, which was the original. They added lavender and ice chip then last year. For some summer color, we all know crepe myrtles. Now, we have had some damage on crepe myrtles with winter last year. I hope we won't this year. But what we're seeing, the new trend, is the dark foliage varieties, the Midnight series. They've got some that have pink flowers, red flowers, but I really like the white flowers because the contrast with that dark foliage and the flowers is great. I love my coralberry or erythrina. That plant is like a hardy hibiscus. It has really woody stalks during the growing season, a tenacious taproot, and it's covered in those red flowers all summer. One downside is there are some little thorns on those stems as you're pruning them out. I would say probably hardy up through Clarksville. Don't forget about plants that bloom later in the season. This is Caryopteris, also called the blue mist plant or blue spirea. The green form is hardier than the yellow form, but there's also a green and white variegated form out there. This plant is covered in blue flowers late in the season, and the bees and butterflies love it. And ornamental grasses. I think purple muhly grass, the one there on the right, is probably the most popular variety that we see in the garden today. All of these ornamental grasses, though, whether you're growing the low ones or the high ones, need to have a haircut and be sheared back before growth begins in late February or March. So since it has been so mild, if you're out pruning, pull back the old foliage, see how much the new growth has come, because you don't want cut edges on the new growth. Edible landscaping, as I mentioned, is very, very popular. On the left there, we've got edible cabbages and kale mixed in with pansies. And if you know, pansies are an edible flower. But if you've ever eaten pansies, you're eating the sugar that they dust them in. I don't think there's a whole lot of flavor there. But this garden on the right is all herbs. Very, very ornamental and totally edible. Again, winter annuals, if you've got pansies and violas, they need some fertilizer. Pansies are not the best this year. They really did not thrive with all that heat in December. So they're a little bit leggy. So if you've got these milder days, get out there and fertilize. And I really think that often we do better with violas than we do with pansies because they are more tolerant of those fluctuating temperatures. And if you've got flowering kale and cabbage in the garden, you may have noticed that it is starting to stretch already, which means bolting, because again, how warm those conditions were this fall. If you don't have hellebores in your garden, go to a garden center on your way home and buy one. This is one of my very favorite plants in the winter landscape. My top one, that Joseph Lemper, has been blooming now in my garden since November. The flowers persist even after bloom. Those petals, which are really sepals, will stay on there until the seed pods are totally mature. So it starts off with this pure white, fades to that kind of greenish pink, and eventually it's lime green. So I will have color on those hellebores, which are right in the front of my house, starting in November and lasting until April. There's probably 20 or 30 varieties now, and all of the new ones, the flowers are upright, the plants are evergreen, so you have foliage year-round, and they will do well in light shade or heavy shade. And the deer leave them alone, as do the squirrels, because they're poisonous. The Mahonia, your Oregon grape holly. Last year we didn't have blooms till late March. This year it's already in full bloom. The bees are active around it. And that Oregon grape holly smells wonderful. And it has nice edible fruit that forms after the flowers fade. This one on the right is a newer variety that came out a couple of years ago called Soft Caress. It actually blooms for us in November. These are both for the shade garden, so they can give you lots of color now. The witch hazel is sort of like that Laura petalum. They're fringe kind of flowers. It's not going to stop traffic, but if you have it near an entrance, you'll smell it, or near your patio or your deck. It's very, very fragrant. It's blooming now or getting ready to, depending on where it is. And then the fall color on the foliage is outstanding. So anytime you can get more than one season of interest, that's a win-win for your garden. The flowering quince, as I said, has already been blooming. Winter honeysuckle is kicking in. Take one branch of that, put it in a vase on your dining room table, and your whole house smells like spring. And then the spireas won't be too far behind. That's what happened last year. The flowers were wide open, they got burned. But if you do see winter damage this year, and it's just like this, it's a burn or the leaves are damaged, do not prune it off as soon as you see it. Now, if for some reason you get branches that are broken, then solve that issue immediately. But with just some kind of burn like this, that's going to serve as a buffer to protect that plant further. And even though those plants were damaged last year, you see where they came back and started blooming, and we still had buds that had not opened that came on even after the fact. Saw this week. These plants are sort of like those hydrangeas. They're not the smartest plant in the world. If we do get a late cold snap, we'll have some damage on these, but enjoy them while you have them. My crocus are up, but I don't see blooms on those yet. And normally, crocus are the first of the spring bulbs to bloom, followed by daffodils, then hyacinths, then tulips. But this year, the daffodils have kind of jumped into the fray a little bit early. The daffodils, we should have blooms from now through March, but it all depends on what the rest of the winter has to tell. You know, the Camden Daffodil Festival is in March. One year they didn't have any daffodils left because it was done, and one year they weren't in bloom yet because it was so cold. So, you know, we do have to depend on the weather here. But remember, whether it's daffodils, tulips, hyacinths, or crocus, it's the 6-week period after bloom that determines how well they bloom next year. So make sure that you add a little fertilizer, you keep them watered, but then you can let them go. You know, tulips for us are gorgeous, but they're not a great repeat bloomer. Most gardeners treat them as annuals. They plant new plants every year. Hyacinths can come back year after year and are probably the most fragrant of the spring flowering bulbs, but you must fertilize. If you plant hyacinths and you never fertilize them, each year they're going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. After bloom, remember I said you need to leave that foliage green for 6 weeks. But don't get out there and twist it and tie it and braid it. Find a new hobby, because that twisting and braiding of the leaves is going to damage the channels that move food and water up and down through the stems. So just let it grow. Mask it with some of the summer annuals or something else out there. But if you don't want to leave it till it dies down naturally, that's fine. Last year, if you didn't cut the foliage off, as mild and cool and wet as our spring was, you probably still had foliage from your daffodils and hyacinths in July. I mark 6 weeks after the last one blooms, and I just come and whack them all back at that time. I know that every bulb in the yard has had enough growth. This is a program that started just last year, and so we're in our second season. Arkansas Diamond, if you see this logo, it means those plants were chosen by the Arkansas Green Industry and Extension. We've decided these are annual plants that do a great job in our gardens. We're about to lose our battery power for this computer. It says up here. So if you see that, it also means they were grown by local Arkansas growers. So the plants, I think it's not going to move forward here either until that happens. But so for last year, we had 6 different annuals. We had dragon wing begonias, which mine were gorgeous this year, even with my Christmas decorations, because they didn't freeze until January. But dragon wing begonias, which come in red or pink. The red one, I think, for us does better. There's a blue fan flower or scaevola, Cora cascade periwinkle, yellow lantanas. We also had, I'm trying to think from memory here, what else we had out there? The redhead coleus. It's a coleus plant that will grow in full sun or total shade. And so these are plants that if you can find them, support them. It means our local commercial growers or greenhouse growers produce them, and they're being sold by nurseries then in the state. So these are the plants for this year. Thank you, Lee. These are the plants for this year. Penta, graffiti red. If you've not grown pentas, fabulous plant in the garden. Hummingbirds and butterflies love it. Plectranthus velvet Elvis. Is that not a fun name? Plectranthus, you might have also seen one called Mona lavender. If you know what Swedish ivy is, that's a Plectranthus. But this is a plant that has sort of a purplish color to the foliage and covered in those purple flowers in the shade all summer. Probably you don't know the name Kufia that well, but Kufia, if you know Mexican heather, that's a Kufia. But Mexican heather has tiny little flowers, but very heat tolerant. This one is Sriracha pink. The flowers are almost the size of a quarter. So these will take the heat and do very, very well. Okay, here's last year's plants. We have Angelonia, the purple Angelonia or summer snapdragon, great our annual. Yellow lantana. We have blue fan flower or scaevola, that was in the top right-hand corner. That redhead coleus in the center, which these new varieties of coleus will just, I think you turned the projector went off. But the redhead coleus is one that these newer varieties will not set those little purple flower spikes that we see a lot of times on the old-fashioned coleus. They wait until the days get shorter, and they initiate their flower buds later in the season. So what's our next slide? I can't see on here. Okay, we've also got, since I'm broadcasting live, they're seeing the pictures, but you guys are not. So just you need to picture these in your mind. Wasabi coleus. When we talk about coleus, there are a lot of new varieties. In fact, one of the things, if you find one that you fall in love with, you won't maybe find it next year because they're releasing anywhere from 10 to 15 new varieties every year. Well, when that happens, a nursery can't carry 100 varieties of coleus. They carry the new ones. So if you find a plant that you fall in love with that is a coleus, you may want to save a cutting of that in the fall to have a new plant for the next year. But then we've also got things like zinnia. Well, no, periwinkle. Who can do? Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay, then we've also got some of the zinnias. I think zinnias have made a great comeback. Now, if you know me, I love the color orange. It's my favorite. Well, zinnia Zahara orange is stunning. The hotter it gets, the better they do. Let's just run through there. There we are. This is just, at that bottom picture, that is 1 6-pack of zinnias. That's how much they grow in one season. Now, to get the most out of your annuals, let's remember fertilize, fertilize, fertilize. To get the most out of my annual vegetables, I fertilize, fertilize, fertilize. And the key is I do a little bit all the time. I never do a lot at any one time because plants can burn with too much fertility. But to get these kind of results, you really do need to fertilize. If you've not tried the Zaharas, I would strongly encourage. February is big pruning month. Make sure you can answer 3 questions. Why are you pruning? When should you be pruning? And how should you be pruning? Don't do this. Crepe murder happens all over the South. That's not even attractive. Now, you know, if you read my blog, I went to the local library in Warren yesterday after I left Master Gardener training, and they had crepe myrtles all the way around their library that the gentleman pruned last year in October, not this past October, the year before. They all died. Now, I mean, sometimes they get really embarrassed, but they usually don't die when they get pruned like this. So I'm not sure why. They actually, the tops died, but they all came back from the root system. But I can't explain it because we're talking South Arkansas. And this happens all over the state of Arkansas, and they typically don't die. Even though we had a little bit of winter damage last year, I can't imagine that every single tree all the way around that building would have had that damage. This is what we're looking at. We would rather have the pruning where we have 3 to 5 main trunks and then the branching begins about 6 feet off the ground. Let them become the trees they were meant to be if you've got a standard crepe myrtle. Their bark can be as pretty in their wintertime as their flowers are in the summer. Look at that bark. Is that beautiful? But if it was knocked off here and had knobs all over it, that's not too attractive. So if you think about it, crepe myrtles are pretty with blooms. Their fall color is one of the best we have. It may be yellow, it may be orange, it may be red, depending on variety. And then the bark can be red, it can be gray, it can be tan, but that's just as pretty in every season. Second only to crepe murder is Bradford butchering. We see Bradford pears pruned like this all over the state. Now, I really don't know why they left that one spike in the center, but if you have these in your yard and you did something like this to them, the next step is a chainsaw to the ground and start over. And if you're replacing a damaged Bradford, don't put another Bradford. There's a lot better trees out there. And we're seeing this, I mean, look at that. And they did it before it bloomed. So the reason to prune, I don't know. And the timing was totally off as well. This is what we see between Alma and Fort Smith. The sides of the interstate in the spring of the year are covered in seedling pears because after Bradfords bloom, they set fruit. And the fruit is eaten by the birds drop the seeds. We've got seedling calorie pears that are taking away a lot of our native vegetation. So don't plant them if you can. When you are pruning, plan your expected outcomes. I saw one this last week that I wish I hadn't been going so fast that I could have pulled over and taken a picture. I call this the chia pet in the landscape. You know, when I'm pruning, I try to get in there and prune a little bit, then I stand back and look at it. You can always take off a few more branches, but you can't put them back on once you get in there. When you are pruning, you want to prune to that collar, not flush. We have the rolled edge that comes the second year, and then the third year it should completely callus over or cover up the wound. Don't use wound paints or tree dressings. That helps you feel good. It doesn't help the plant at all. All roses must be pruned every year. And you'll hear people say, prune them when they're dormant on George Washington's birthday. Roses are rarely dormant on George Washington's birthday in Arkansas. Those plants are not dormant. They've got sprouts, but still wait till late February. Right now, lots of people are ready to prune because the plants are growing. But if you prune and winter happens, you may lose the plant. So get through the bulk of the winter and then do your pruning. And if there is damage, you can prune it off. Now, hybrid teas need very precise pruning. But if you're growing the shrub roses like the knockouts or the drifts, you can just have a bad day, grab your pruning shears and whack at them. You'll feel a whole lot better. Take them back 8 to 18 inches from the ground. They're just like those buddleias or butterfly bushes. They bloom on the new growth. So prune them hard before they really kick into active growth in March. Again, the ornamental grasses, even the liriope or the monkey grass, it typically looks bad after a winter. Give it a haircut, but pull back the old growth so you don't have cut edges on the new growth. Know when to prune. If it blooms in the spring, do your pruning right after it blooms. The only exceptions to the rule are going to be gardenias and the big leaf hydrangeas. They bloom in the summer, but they set flower buds in the fall. So a very short window of opportunity. The only thing different with those two forsythias is one was pruned properly and one was pruned with an electric hedge trimmer and made into those lovely little balls. Which would you rather have in your yard? The one that has more blooms is pruned by thinning out the cuts down low. Check your gardens. Weeds have had a heyday this year. Winter weeds were growing when summer weeds were. You know, some people call their weeds a wildflower in their lawn. Things like spring beauty or some of those others that are really pretty, but then they're gone. If you have a few, they come back. In fact, hairy bittercress is a winter annual that is setting seeds now, and you go to pull it, and those little cigar-shaped seed pods are like artillery, and they shoot the seeds everywhere. That Chambers bitters is one of my summer weed problems that comes back year after year, but it sets seeds on the undersurface of the leaves, so be careful with that. Many people have mulberry weed as a real issue. If you're seeing that, it forms a lot of seeds and it can really take over. I tell people that the best method of weed control in your vegetable gardens and flower beds is the Santa Claus method, which is hoe, hoe, hoe. And County 76, our Master Gardener group outside, has some excellent hoes that do a great job. But scraping the surface, getting rid of those weeds is your best method of weed control versus tilling and bringing more weed seeds to the surface. And anything that is going to spray that will kill a broadleaf weed is also going to kill your broadleaf flowers and vegetables. So I really don't recommend those herbicides in the garden. And if you have nut grass, your best method of control is to move to a yard that doesn't have it. It's very, very difficult to get rid of. Make sure that when you're walking the garden and you spot a problem, identify what it is. If you're not sure what it is, Sherry Smith is here today with her microscope. She can determine it, but she's got a lab back in Fayetteville. You can take your samples to your county office and they can send it off to her and identify it properly. We had people that were spraying this for powdery mildew. That's powdery mildew. It looks similar. This is a disease. That's an insect. So if you're spraying with the fungicide and it's an insect, it's not going to do any good. So identify the problem and control it. If you've got crepe myrtles, we've got a new insect. Now this is our third season for it, and we're seeing more and more and more of them all the time. If you notice this black on the outside, in fact, my column for this Saturday, somebody wrote in and they said, the people, I think it was Texarkana, they pruned terribly. She said, but not only did they just chop them off, but they then torched them. They're black. Well, they didn't torch them. I think they have scale insects, and the scale insects are giving off that sticky honeydew, which causes that black sooty mold to form. So if you see this black sooty mold, look closely. That was actually a tree I took in Texarkana this summer, covered in it. If you've got branches that heavy, prune them out. Right now, you still have a chance to put a dormant oil on there to try to smother as many as are there. But then I would still recommend a systemic insecticide in March or April.
Does it only hit the crepe myrtles?
It's only on crepe myrtles. This is a specific insect, and right now we have not seen it past Little Rock. But that doesn't make sense to me because it's in Memphis, but it's not in West Memphis. So we hope it doesn't get there, but I think eventually it will. It probably will be limited based on cold, so it may not make it to Northwest Arkansas, but we don't know enough. So does it kill a crepe myrtle? No, at least not outright. But we have seen where we've had heavy infestations where they did not bloom as well. There is a fact sheet on our website that gives you more information about it. We also had the emerald ash borer that came in with firewood from hunters and fishermen. We've now seen it, I think, in 15 counties in Arkansas. This has an impact on our ash trees, but we don't have that many ash trees. But we're not sure what the effect is going to be on the fringe tree or Grancy graybeard, which is in the same family. So make sure that you are paying attention to some of these. So regardless of the style of your home, that's mine there on the left, no, just kidding, or the style of your gardening, make sure it reflects who you are. Beautiful and low maintenance, both in the vegetable garden, the fruit garden, and the flower garden, are possible by choosing the right plants, planting at the right time, and knowing how to maintain them. Your garden should be a reflection of who you are. And whether you plant flowers or vegetables or fruit, just make sure you have fun with your garden. Okay, are there any questions? Thank you all very, very much. And now